Welcome to this next section of the DoD Modernization Exchange. My guest today is Paul Kurtz, the Chief Cybersecurity Advisor and Field Chief Technology Officer at Splunk. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Jason, it's great to be here with you.
There are a host of cybersecurity challenges that the Defense Department faces. We could talk probably for hours about them all, but we're going to focus maybe just on a few big ones that I think you see some, if you will, light at the end of the tunnel, some ways to really give DoD some major help. And the first one that I think emerged is this idea of mobile device security. We know through the use of mobile devices, DoD is spending a lot more time in the field at the tactical edge using these mobile types of devices. Let's start with that. What do you see as the big challenge, and how can DoD start to overcome it?
Well, I think the first thing one can start thinking and just say, well, DoD is a static entity and they're not moving around. Well, they're anything but that. DoD is in constant motion, where it's the Air Force or the Navy or the Army, Marines, all of them are moving all the time. And it's not as though like you and I are sitting here having a conversation, looking at our computers and saying, if you will, static. DoD is always moving. So when you look at the challenge that DoD has to ensure that their mobility devices, all types of devices, whatever they might be in, aircraft, ship, whatever it is, they need to be secure. They need to not only be secure, but they need to be robust and they need to be able to operate in very, very rough conditions. And so when I think of job one in DoD, when it comes to security and resiliency, it really comes down to mobile devices. That is absolutely critical that they operate.
One of the things that I've spent a lot of time covering over the last couple months is the Army, for instance, and their next generation command and control. And they're really trying to get that down to smaller unit sizes, down to echelon, down to unit. And it's always very interesting to hear them talk about, how big it is today and where they want to go. And I think that's a perfect example of that security. Are mobile devices any different than big hardware devices? Is there considerations folks need to keep in mind? Anything different? I mean, we always think about our own cell phones, right? And we still have to worry about clicking on links that could then create corruption in our cell phones. Talk a little bit about what if this challenge is any different with mobile devices.
Well, it's a great question. There are some likenesses there. You can still click on a link, on a DoD mobile device, and bad things can happen. So we have to we have to be mindful of that. But when I think about mobility and what it means to DoD, it always must be resilient. It must be able to operate in all sorts of different conditions. And you think about the conditions that are out there, whether it's on the water or in the air or in very rugged terrain, where we I think take a lot of things for granted when we think about, well, what is the operational environment for the military and how do those devices hold up? How do we know that they're secure? How do we know that they're not leaking data? Those are really, really important points. And mobility is only going to grow. It's not going to get any, we're not going to become static and be sitting still fighting wars.
It's funny because when you were talking a little bit about the operational environment and how the devices hold up, I'm thinking, oh, rugged laptops. You probably remember back in the mid 2000s, DoD was big on these rugged laptops, and this is well before the iPhone, the Android phone, the mobile device kind of that was your mobile device's big rugged laptop, and now they're much smaller, much more form factor. The one thing when you think of mobile devices is access to data. The idea that, okay, can they go back into the cloud or go back on-prem, grab the data and transmit data? Is that another area that you would point to say, hey, that idea of security becomes more important because mobile devices, again, have so much more power than they once did, but also can reach back for data in a much different way, and sometimes in a lighter way than these big, heavy laptops used to be able to do.
Well, yeah, and I believe that's, the way I would talk about that's a context of resiliency, that they can operate, and reach back, whether to the cloud or to an on-prem facility or something that's hybrid. There's all sorts of um, uh, different communication paths that you have with a mobile device, and one of the things, Jason, I think this kind of leads us into is the next challenge, which I would highlight, and that is, all right. So you have your mobile devices, but you have the much broader architecture. It can be the cloud, it can be hybrid environment, whatever it might be, and that comes down to, well, how do you know that the entire infrastructure is operating securely? And that boils down to zero trust and making sure that whomever is coming on the line is supposed to be on the line and doing things that are appropriate and within guidance.
I was about to ask you that same question. I'm glad you took us down the path of zero trust because as we were talking about mobile devices and data, obviously it comes back to protecting the network in a trust but verify way. So as DoD kind of goes through this zero trust, effort, the 91 initial target capabilities, 151 advanced capabilities. What are you starting to see from them in terms of looking at their devices, applying zero trust at the device level? What are some of those trends?
Well, I think, it's such a comprehensive program that they put in place. And so it is ensuring that we have, involves a verification of identity of users, devices, granting access to resources. And I think that the last phrase there, access to resources, is quite a general term, but it really, at the heart, is very specific. Who has access to what and when, and the zero trust architecture laid over the top of it provides that level of assurance that those that need access to data can get that access, but at the same time, uh, also block those that should not have access. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. And one of the questions you might have in your mind is, well, how do you monitor all that? How do you understand that this, you have, you take your mobile environment, you throw zero trust on top of it. Well, all right. So how do you stay on top of that architecture and understand that it's actually doing what it should be doing, that you're actually getting all the signal you need in order to understand that the network is healthy and that there isn't something like a pervasive problem across the network. And I was doing a little research getting ready for this, and you think back to solar winds, and solar winds brought a lot to us and helped, I think, bring the zero trust architecture really into play and made it far more real, because we didn't really have the insight we needed to understand how bad actors, such as in the case of solar winds, the Russians, were able to invade networks.
You were talking about this role-based access, this idea of access-based controls. Something we've been talking about, I feel like, for the past, 20 plus years. Why is it now a better time? How has the technology evolved to the point where it's easier to do, especially for mobile devices, to say, Paul Kurtz can see this file, but he can't write on it, right? Or he can't even see it or write it. Or Paul can see it, write on it, and manipulate it and share it and do whatever he needs to do. Why is it easier today than maybe ever before to add those controls?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jason. And I think, we over the past 10 years or so have advanced significantly. We can write code now that gives a lot more flexibility to what do you want users to see or not to see? What do you want them to be able to do or not do? And there's all that flexibility is rolled up into products that DoD uses, critical infrastructure owner operators use it, we use it, and so we've advanced significantly, and there is the expectation, just like we have an expectation in the private sector, to have a level of flexibility and insight to do what we need to do in order to get our job done. The same thing is true in the DoD environment, except it's a far more robust atmosphere. In other words, the integrity of data, the durability of the architecture needs to be far more taken into account than in a normal private sector environment.
You mentioned this idea, you went back to this idea of solar winds, how it really brought in the zero trust architecture. Maybe delve into that a little bit more. What was it about that incident and others like it that you say, okay, this maybe helped us get over that hump, if even there was a hump, where why zero trust is so important?
Well, I think it actually leads is a great question, Jason. I think it actually leads to what the third challenge that I would highlight, and that is protection from foreign commercial spyware. Now that sounds very specific, but if we broaden that out a bit, we can begin to understand that there's a lot of third-party software that's in play, and that third-party software can be taken advantage of by foreign adversaries, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, you name the party. And so it becomes really important that we have a much better understanding of what software we're using, how it's being used, for what purpose.
I think that was kind of what happened with solar winds is I think people understood what was being used, but then how was it developed, those back end challenges. Is this a growing recognition among the community, whether it's folks like you at Splunk or within DoD or more broadly the government, that they have to have a better understanding of what is on the software? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about supply chain, but are you starting to see questions? Are you starting to see your clients ask for more details?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that kind of post solar winds you're seeing the change?
Well, in the context of, say, for example, Splunk, what we're really trying to make sure is that our customers, a DoD environment, whoever it could be a private sector environment, that um, the system is operating as it should and it's only doing what it should be doing. And to be able to have that, synoptic understanding of what is actually going on in the infrastructure. When it comes to access controls, when it comes to, people logging in or logging out. It gets very, very down to granular activity and being able to put all of that data together. You think of like the universe that DoD operates in and the myriad of data sources that they operate with, and making sure all that data is, so to speak, healthy, and it's being used for what it's supposed to be used for, takes a lot of monitoring to fully understand, is this network actually healthy, and can you, so to speak, prove it? And that's where, a company like Splunk can be exceptionally helpful to a customer, in this context, a DoD environment.
You've mentioned this idea of is your network healthy? Can you prove it several times? Maybe let's talk a little bit more into that because I think that's a big question for a lot of folks, public sector and private sector, whether or not they can look at the data, understand the data, and then say, okay, how do we act on that data? We hear all the time, Paul, well, we've got to be more proactive with cybersecurity. We have to get ahead of the threat as much as possible. How does that happen these days? I know maybe you'll probably tell me something about artificial intelligence and machine learning, but talk a little bit about that network healthiness and proving it.
Splunk has been around for a long time, and and really born of this idea that we have to have an understanding of what's going on in our networks. And let's put DoD to the side for a moment. And the real question is, um, how do you understand um, what's happening on your network through data flows? How do you assimilate that picture in a way that gives you an idea that the network is operating as it should, or there's a flag in there because something's gone wrong, and it could be a technical glitch. This, by the way, this doesn't all have to be about bad actors. It can be a technical glitch. There was an implementation that didn't work right. Well, that does add up. That does relate to resiliency. So if we put all these pieces together, the idea behind what Splunk does is to really give you that fulsome understanding of what's going on in the networks and being able to give an operator the ability to drill down very, very deeply to understand what's actually happening in the network. And there's other there are other vendors that are out there that do an awesome job. But what Splunk really allows, especially which is especially important in the DoD environment, is to really be able to drill down into what's actually happening on networks and have that total flexibility and not be left up against a wall like I can't get through, I can't uh, get a clear understanding of what's actually happening in the network and why. And Splunk brings that out for customers and makes it easier to do. Now, one of the things, Jason, you did mention is, how does AI or automation fit into this? And, and naturally, we're going down that road. We clearly use automation, and we are starting to use AI to make life easier for customers. And in the automation side, say for example, uh, we use secure orchestration automated response, which basically allows you to run playbooks to get to the bottom of a problem. And when it comes to the application of AI, really what we're doing now is taking the very first steps into how do we make life easier for the operator to, let's say there's a given problem on the network. How do you summarize what's actually happening? And we're using AI in order to do that in the context of security to offer a very quick and easy summary for an operator to see that helps them as the human get to the bottom of the problem more quickly.
I'm so glad you brought up this idea, or that sometimes problems with the network can be a technical glitch. I think hopefully we hope most of the time that is the problem and not somebody who is unfortunately coming into your network and wreaking havoc. So I think it's an important differentiation. But to your point about the last point you made about summarizing what's happening on your network using AI to do that, there's so much data that is on your network, right? We've talked about the three V's for so long, right? Volume, velocity, and veracity of data, that you need help. And I think that's where a lot of the security operations center are turning to AI. Are you getting more customers asking about how can we deal with all this data? How can we apply tools, automation, AI, you name it, to really understand what's happening so we can see the difference between a technical glitch and a true threat from a hacker?
There's two halves here. There's the one half that is really security centric. Um, you know, is the system doing what it's supposed to be doing? Is it robust as far as security goes? Then the other half is observability. You know, is the system operating as it should, having nothing to do with the security problem? We bring those two worlds together. Think of it as a sphere, security, with security being one half the sphere and the other half being observability. We bring those two pieces together for the customer. And if you will, the soft GUI center of that sphere is data management. So if you think about it that way, that's how we help our customers. We give them the feeling and the sense and with data that things are operating as they should from a security perspective. On the other hand, being able to understand that things are operating as they should, that there are not any technical glitches, and that you have a thorough understanding of the data that you have on a real-time basis. And I think that's one of the things we haven't talked about yet that I think is really important is how do you assimilate all this data like that in real time and give owners and operators a clear understanding of what's going on. And you think of that, in the context of a banking and financial institution, obviously it's very important, but you look at it in a DoD context, it's extremely important in that, but for different reasons.
All right, Paul, you said soft GUI center, and I'm thinking about the Tootsie Pop that we're going to have to lean into after our conversation
Yeah, I just
today.
kind of made that up as I was going along. I think it holds. I think it
I think it
holds.
holds. I will go with you on it. The last piece of this that again we could talk more about observability, we could talk more about kind of that real-time data, but I just want to hit upon one last piece of this in the last 5 or so minutes we have together, which is the threats against the defense industrial base. And I think this is something DoD has been also obviously focused on through the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification (CMMC) program, but also more broadly NIST 800-171 CUI data. Talk a little bit about how the DIB themselves can also take advantage of not just Splunk's tools, but this idea of securing their data, understanding what the cyber threats are as it relates to their work with DoD.
Yeah, I think the point of the DIB in the cyber threats in the context of the defense industrial base, I think brings, so to speak, a lot of these pieces together. How do you step back from the defense industrial base and understand that it's working as it should? And in this context, certainly technical capabilities like Splunk has are really important. But you also kind of, to be honest, I think you need to step back even further, and that means bringing humans in to um, uh, get an idea, to think more broadly as to what could go wrong, and to be specific. I think this is a place where humans play a role in, so to speak, doing tabletop exercises. How do you take a step back from the infrastructure, look at it objectively, kind of put the technical um, um, telemetry to the side for the moment, but look at this infrastructure and how it works, and ask yourself the questions: will this infrastructure hold up in XYZ conditions? Will it hold up on the North Pole? Will it hold up in space? You know, will it hold up, thousands of feet underwater? You know, those are the kind of questions that we need to step back and understand. And then if we do a good job understanding the complexities and the potential vulnerabilities, then we can re-engineer systems, and then monitor those systems as appropriate going forward to make sure that the system, that what we're doing is actually going to hold up in extreme circumstances. If you look at uh, what Splunk is really good at is telling you what's going on right now, and being able to look backward in that and see those trends and understand it. And as far as extrapolating and going forward, that's where, Splunk can do some work in that space. But really, this is where the human steps in. And in other words, we're not turning the world over to machines. We're able to take a step back and take a broader look and say, what does this DIB look like? What's the defense industrial base look like? And are we doing whatever we can to make sure it's resilient and robust?
Comes back to those two key words: resiliency, robustness. This idea that whether you're a DoD, whether you're in the defense industrial base, that is really what's driving a lot of these changes, this understanding of how to secure systems, data, networks, and the like. Paul, we're just about out of time. I'm going to give you the last word and kind of wrap this up in a nice bow for us. As we are focused on the cyber threats and there's so many challenges that DoD faces, from your perspective, what's our big takeaway from our conversation today? What do you hope you want to leave folks with as we continue this conversation around modernization and cybersecurity?
I guess I'll go back to the 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 analogy of the sphere and bringing security and observability together in a consistent way, and also thinking about all the data that in the center, so to speak, uh, and making sure we have a comprehensive understanding of how all of that is working. When I step back, and I've been in the cybersecurity business for since roughly 1999, Y2K. When there was when I was at the White House, there was a debate as to whether or not we would even use the word cyber, because people wouldn't be able to understand it. And look where we are today. When we look at that continuum, it was this problem, that problem, or the other problem, and we would rush to respond on a specific problem, whether it's a malware issue, whether it's an authentication issue. Now, of course, our infrastructure is dependent upon IT. And so we have to see uh, this as a whole, the information infrastructure as a whole, and how do we monitor it and understand it as a whole to understand that it's really robust, it's really working, it's doing as it should be doing. That's a huge stretch over the past 25 years. And I think we are finally coming into that age now with automation and AI, where we can begin to extrapolate more in the future. So it's almost as though, Jason, we it's a series of building blocks we've been putting together, but now we have that more comprehensive view of what's going on, and candidly giving our dependence on the information infrastructure. We have no choice but to continue to improve how we bring security, observability, and data together in a synoptic way to really high levels of sophistication, especially in the context of DoD.
And as systems become more interconnected, as we see the conversions of IT, OT, all that becomes much more important that you can look at it from that holistic picture. Uh, for us, Paul, unfortunately, our holistic picture is coming to a close. We are out of time for this session of the DoD Modernization Exchange. So let me thank my guest. Paul Kurtz is the Chief Cybersecurity Advisor and the Field Chief Technology Officer at Splunk. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jason. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the DoD Modernization Exchange.